and Sean's loaded, so if you bear with me for 1 second here. And I can grab this from you, thank you. And then, I think it's over here somewhere. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'd first like to start by just, so it helps me understand, and also who we've got in the room. You guys may all know each other, but some new faces to me. If you wouldn't mind just letting me know what your role is at the county, whether you're staff, a planning commissioner, or just an avid observer. So I'm going to just start with you because you're right here in front of me. What's your role, sir, in your name?
I'm Bill Radke with the Georgia Valley Special Planning Area.
Excellent.
And I'm Donna Starley, and I'm a planning commissioner in Illinois.
Oh, excellent. Great.
I'm Gina Iverson. I'm the planning secretary for the
All right, all these planners. I love it. Okay.
Walter Burr, San Juan County, planning and zoning director.
Great.
I'm Kate Wilson, Deputy County Planning
John Foster, Daggett County Planning Zoning.
It's a brain trust.
Jared
This is
Jones, Humber County Planning and Zoning.
Great.
Kyle Blackman, Beaver County Planning.
Sir?
Wade Dean, King County Commission Planning.
And Dean Melford, the zoning administrator. Wendy Allen, King County administrative assistant.
Great.
Shannon McBride, King County planner.
Wow, great. Okay, sir?
Butler County, I'm county attorney.
Oh, yeah.
Boxer County Planning Staff.
County Planner.
Great. And then we know you, Alex.
Kevin Files.
Are you a planning?
Sorry, zoning administrator.
Zoning administrator. Excellent.
Jennifer Carlisle, I'm a planner for Wasatch County.
Oh, cool.
Mike Smith, Wasatch County Planning Commission.
Chuck Zurcher, Wasatch County Planning Commission.
Chuck.
Also Corey, Wasatch County.
Eric Hutchinson, compliance at ULAPS.
Molly Stevens with Millard County Planning.
Joyce Barney, Millard County Planning Zone.
John Crippen, County Administrator.
Travis Air, Wasatch County Planner.
Matt Wilson, Weaver County, got the attorney's office.
Mary Whitchurch, Wasatch County, J. Spa Planning Commissioner.
Oh, great. Wow, great. So really, this is my kind of people. This is great. And we do have 1 or 2 attorneys, so we'll all stay in line. And if I say anything, you guys can just say, like you do at meetings, you can just interject and say, I think not. Give us your opinion. Well, and how many of you have been doing this for a long time? Well, is this your, let's flip that. How about how many of you are just newly appointed to this position? Okay, great. And then we've got some experts in the room. And we do have a clerk, right? Somewhere, or the zone or secretary? Yeah, you guys are, so you keep us in line too after the attorneys, because you guys know all the rules and procedures. So that's good. Well, that's helpful for me. Sometimes we have a mix of elected officials and others, but mostly then this will be really germane to what we're talking about today. And so I'm going to start off and talk about powers and duties. I'm going to give you a teaser of an agenda for our 101. Should you, let's see. Is it on? So maybe I will have you see if we can work on that for a second. I thought I turned it on. Use it. Well, this is good. This will get it out of the way for all the other folks. There we go. Perfect. So this is just a teaser for the 4-hour action-packed training that we do on Saturdays. We just had our last one this Saturday. We have another one in August, another one in November. We're also working on editing them and getting them up. But this just shows you what we go through in that 4-hour session. What I'm going to talk about today is the first part, which is the review of your statutory duties. And this is interactive, so if you guys have questions or you say, hey, that's not how we think we do it, or hey, this is what I've heard, please let me know. We're here for you to help you put the law into practice and give you a refresher. So lots of acronyms, right, in land use. So for those of you that are new, you may be like, it may take you the first few sessions to figure out what is everyone talking about. Why do I say lots of acronyms? Well, we'll talk about education. So if you don't understand those acronyms, how is the public or at your meetings when you talk to folks or even the commissioners? So we're going to talk about acronyms. We're going to talk about why we even do this planning commission at the county level. Like, what's the point? Why are you even there? What the law says, what the state tells you can and can't do. Who does what? Maybe you probably already know that, but our fresher planning commissioners, you get a lot of say in making recommendations up to your county council. And then where to get help, and then we'll finish off with all the acronyms. LUDMA, CLUDMA, OPMA, GRAMA, CUP, LUA, CCPC, and I had to put in PU. Sorry, just because. Acronyms. So how many of you know what all of these means already? Show of hands. You all know them. You will know them, okay, in about 40 minutes. And then you can throw these around. I know you know some of them. But the most important up here is the second one, which is CLUDMA, okay? Because that is what gives you your statutory authority at every planning commission meeting. When you sit behind that dais to make decisions, this is where it's coming from. So, why do you care? Why do we care about land use? Why do you guys spend all these evenings just for fun at these meetings and reviewing these packets and thinking about and caring about your community? Well, I'd say we care for two reasons, but the main one I'm here to tell you about today is because of the Utah State Legislature. Okay? The Utah State Legislature creates cities and counties, makes the authority. We are creatures of the state. They give us the statute that enables us to plan for land use in our counties and our cities. Okay? So since 2005, and this number's gone up just since this last legislative session, there have been over 60 changes to the land use law since 2005. So are all your county codes and your planning statutes up to date? You guys updated all of these every year when they come out? Okay, good. Good answer. Yep, you do. Thank you. I'd like to hear that, or we'll report that back to Capitol Hill. So our job and Johnny's job and our help is to try to help you understand what those requirements are and get your codes up to date. Because, as you'll see, the Utah State gives you an incredible ability at the local level to decide what's right for you. So Daggett's different than Summit's different than Wasatch's different than Duchesne. Hey, there he is, man of the hour. Want to give me a hook and switch? Or okay.
No, you're doing a great
All
job.
right. Okay, well, we're glad you're here. And please, we have another attorney in the room, so now, Sean, you can just interject and correct me when I'm wrong. So the state legislature is really giving us that source of authority. CLUDMA. This should be your first acronym and the one that you'll come to learn to love and know. CLUDMA is your, and I have city and county citations in here, so bear with me, but the source of authority that you guys should know and have as a favorite on your phone, on your computer, wherever, is this Title 17, Chapter 27A. That is the County Land Use Development and Management Act. So CLUDMA and LUDMA, as I said at the beginning, they're very, very similar. The county, you have some different provisions with agricultural protection zones, the requirements you had a few years ago to come up with agricultural plans and plans for the future. This year, the state legislature gave us, the cities, some more requirements than you, so we're balancing out. But every year, there seems to be a little tweak. The state website, le.utah.gov, is really, I think, user-friendly and easy. They update the statutes all the time. So if you ever have a question of like, what did she talk about or what were they saying, you can go right to the website and that will help inform your own decisions. So those are our first two. CLUDMA is what you want to know and come to love. So what does this tell you? What does this say? What is the state telling us? Well, it says the legislative body, the county commission, They are the source of authority and for land use in your communities. It mandates that you have to have a planning commission. It's advisory, it always has been. So if you are delegated to actually act, how many of you as planning commissioners approve something? Do you guys actually take final approval? Okay, so that's been delegated to you. That is a choice by the county council to make that decision. You have to have land use authorities, one of our other terms, LUA, land use authority. Any of you know if you're land use authorities in the room? Ah, we've got one, great. So when we come to that, you can and we'll make sure that's clear. You have to have appeal authorities. Okay, anyone remember a term, Board of Adjustment? Okay, that's what appeal authorities, that's the new statutory name, we'll talk about that. And then you have to have a plan for how you're going to deal with growth in your communities. Anyone notice anything that's missing up there that maybe you use often when you're making approvals or you're making decisions? Anything jump out to you that's not mandated for you to have by the state? Your code, your zoning code. Not required under the state of Utah. A little weird, right? Because we have a plan, we have people who are planning, we have some maybe rules and regulations, but they don't require you to have zoning. So those are the statutory requirements, and the state does respect the ability for local control to plan and create that vision through your general plan. We still have that. What I'd like to leave you with today, one of the thoughts though is we have an incredible amount of control in order to shape those plans, but the state is also going to put some limitations and arms around that through noticing, processing, transparency. So if we can abide by those rules and procedures, then I hope we can maintain that ability to have local control and flexibility about what vision we want to plan for. Some of you may remember in the room, Sean, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a bill by Mansell to remove the right for our communities to zone. Anyone remember that bill that was up on the hill? So I'm not quite sure what that would have done, but they were pretty mad that we weren't, cities and counties weren't allowing development to move forward in what they thought was a good fashion. So they were going to strip the right to have us have the ability to zone. And I put that out there because I think, one, it's a reminder that that's certainly something that could happen, but two, it's interesting to think about what would that mean? What would have come in its place? I don't know. So something just to think about. So that is the statutory requirement. We're done. You guys can go home. Okay. We're going to have, like I said, a lot of information here, so please interrupt if you have questions or comments. So the other part, so there's that stick. We plan because we're told to, but we also do it, right? Because we have a huge investment in our community, fiscal stability, those words you've heard before, health, safety, welfare. What does that really mean? Well, that's how you lay out the road, how your kids get to school, if there are parks, right? All of those things that fundamentally we do at the Planning Commission level. Okay, what does it take? Well, for those veterans in the room, do you guys pass ordinances probably in one night? And it's pretty easy. People don't really get upset about what you do with their property rights. Right? So it takes political will. It takes priorities. Right? Planning commissioners, maybe you get overwhelmed, maybe you spend 17 hours on a fence. Maybe you don't, I don't know. But it takes some organization and thought and figuring out how we should move forward and really what is our role in communication with your county council and communications with the cities in your jurisdiction, right? It's I will say the dirty word, it's regional, right? We all sort of work together and we need to communicate together. So, what about the history of planning? Why do we plan? good reasons, mandated reasons. What's the history of planning in the state? Well, there's often, I hear, so I've lived here 28 years, and so when I moved to Utah, I heard a lot about, well, what, planning is communism, and why are you guys telling us what to do with your property rights, and you can't tell me this and that. And there's actually a deep-seated history of planning in the state. And this is back in 1833, and I'm sorry the bottom got cut off here, but this is the first subdivision plat, or a grid, and rules of a set of regulations and rules. And if you look at that, it's pretty direct, right? You have to have a 10-acre block, you have to have a certain division of that lot, you have to have a house per lot, you have to have a setback. Look at that, 1883 we had setbacks. And you had to have design standards. It goes on to talk about how buildings had to either be brick or stone. You had to have gardens, you had to have a shrub and tree in the front and a fruit tree in the front yard. So we have a deep-seated history of how we deal with the balance between the rights of the individual and the community to move forward for our communities. So I talked about that framework, or those arms or limitations. So I ask you to, as your role as planning commissioners, really please be sure that you know what your role is and what your limitations are and what the state is asking you to do as far as procedure and process, so that we can retain that right to be able to design that future that's really different throughout the state. And remember, of course, right, we work really hard on zoning, we work hard on these plans, but they're not static. Once we do it, it's not done. Is your community the same as now as it was 5 years ago? Will it be the same in another 5 years? Right? So it's a living, breathing document to the sense that the plan's going to inform that zoning, but it's not done and done. It's something that you're always, it's like job security, right? You're always going to be looking at it. You're always going to be thinking about it. And you guys, the planning commissioners, are the brain trust. And the state said you guys are the advisors. You guys do that hard work on planning and land use. Okay, and then of course this, because we all bring differences of opinions and different perspectives, but we're all there for the common goal. Right? And we should embrace those different perspectives in order to get to that common vision for our community. So, a governmental primer or reminder, when you have your county land use code, your planning and zoning code, whatever you look for, you think that big book, that's it? Well, I want to remind you that it's informed by these other federal and state statutes. So we're at the bottom of the food chain, really. And that's why the attorneys in the room, we appreciate your input and your thought. You guys keep us online and say, remember, all these other things. So we have the federal decisions and rules and Supreme Court decisions. We have our own state constitution, our state decisions, and then we have our state administrative rules. Then we have our own local land use code. So just remember that when you are drafting ordinances or looking at, make sure that you guys are in line with not only our state statute, but other federal provisions. This is, the citation would be Title 17, 9A 102, but this is Title 10. And I put this up here for one reason. When I talked about that the state tells us we can have all that discretion at the local level to figure out what our plans and visions are, what we want Tooele County to look like, what we want, Washington County to look like, what our different counties want to be. Well, this is that source of authority. Have you ever sat at a planning commission meeting and someone's come up and said to you, what right do you have to tell me that my barn can't be right next to my property line, or that my fence has to be 5 feet tall, not 7? Anyone ever had any discussions like that, or everyone's pretty happy with all the regulations that you guys enact? Okay, well, maybe we'll just skip this section. But if you've ever had that, or if you ever wondered, sitting up there before you pass an ordinance or enact a law, like, who gave you this right to do this? This is that source of authority. And I put it up there for two reasons. The second I'll get to in a second, but I'd like to read this for 1 second. And it's the area in blue, and it says, to accomplish the purposes of this chapter, municipalities, counties may enact all ordinances, resolutions, and rules, and may enter into other forms of land use controls and development agreements. And here it is, that they consider necessary or appropriate for the use and development of land within the municipality. Pretty mind-blowing if you actually think about that, right? That's a huge source of authority that they're delegating to you to figure out what to do. And then it goes on and talks about the different areas. And this last sentence got changed because we always have other sides of the story, other interests that think maybe we shouldn't have this amount of authority at the local level. But it says here at the end, unless we tell you you can't. So just remember, we can tell you you can't. But for now, we're going to let you guys see if you can figure it out. So let's adhere to the notice, the open a meeting, the grammar stuff that Johnny's going to talk about this afternoon with you. Let's continue to adhere to those procedures and make sure that we are processing development in an equitable and reasonable manner so that we can retain this right to able to design that at our own local level. These are some basic themes of that CLEDMA. Private property rights, we've talked about that balance. This may seem funny too in number 3, you have to write it down and you have to abide by it. But believe it or not, those are relatively new. Because way back when, maybe we were just kind of sitting up there at the dais and deciding this is how we want to do it tonight. And maybe the next meeting was another way. So we can't do that. Have to write it down, have to abide by it. You have discretion in the legislative arena, and we'll talk about that a little further. And that formality, this last one, number 7. Over the last 10 years now, the state has said, really, not only are we saying you guys at the local level understand what the vision for growth is in your communities, but you also know best the process. So you're all different sizes, different locations, different staffing. So you figure out at the local level what's the best process to administer development permits in your community. So do you have a staff of 10? Can they do it? Then delegate and figure it out. Do you have the one clerk who does everything? Then, give her a raise and let her do it. You guys decide. Planning Commission will talk about that's part of your statutory role, is to look at that and make that decision. I add this in there because this was added a few years ago, but the other reason I had that big paragraph with a line through it was each of those paragraphs were one sentence. So when we write codes and ordinances, which a lot of you do, and attorneys just plug your ears, if we don't understand it, and we don't even understand what we're adopting, how are we A, going to enforce it, and B, how is the public going to even understand what their right is when they come in to pull a permit? So sometimes the attorneys want to add all this language, and I go to these meetings with the attorneys and developers, and they want to add stuff about preponderance and quantilla and scintilla, and I'm like, you know what? Could we just say this is what we want to do and this is how you do it? So there's my one dig. I love you attorneys, but sometimes we just need to have plain language. And this was codified, which is the irony, because they keep trying to, this was codified at the suggestion of the attorneys, but then they don't maybe necessarily practice that. Plain language, it's in the state code. Plain language in your codes, okay? I know things aren't always black and white. I know things are gray, but the more we can say, hi, welcome to our community. These are the rules we decided. You have to have pink houses, green shutters, one fruit tree in the front yard, and no brick. That's what we decided, okay, in Daggett County. That's how we want to proceed. Welcome to our community. We're here to say how, not no, right? So this plain language, the other important part about this, so if there is ambiguity in your code, like if you don't understand what it means, like I'm not quite sure, we think this means that, when it goes to the courts, what is the decision going to be in favor of the county or the developer? Developer. So onus is on us to get our codes in shape, right? Make sure maybe you do a punch list and go through your code and find those sections that nobody understands and throw them up on the wall and make a work plan and go through and try to just update and clarify those, maybe to pick one a month. Maybe you're all set, maybe you've already done that. And yes, that is Boston, and he is safe because I'm a Boston fan, so I just go to a runner. Okay. So, plain language, again, objectivity, not subjectivity. Like I said, I know that sometimes there's areas where we have to maybe not be so clear, but the more you can use that clear, objective language. If any of you guys have in your codes this language that says, the planning commission at its discretion shall. Please, that should be the biggest lightning bolt red flag to you, and that needs to go. You guys aren't there to just arbitrarily decide what you feel like that night. It's a set of standards that you apply uniformly. You decide those standards through the community process, but it's not for you to arbitrarily decide outside of that code. Land use authority, we have our one land use authority in the room. We put you on the spot, so what are you? What do you do? What does it mean with the new title? What are you?
I make sure, I guess, that when people come in with an application, that they follow the application, or the rules are set that they follow those rules.
And then do you have a big stamp?
I do.
Does
And I send it to the planning consulting commission.
So do you stamp it approved, or do you stamp it like, I think this is good for you to look at?
Both, depending on what it is.
Okay, and why do you send it up to them then, just for information, or?
Sometimes I don't have the authority to approve.
Okay, excellent, so this is great. So this is that flexibility I was talking about. And so it looks like in their case, he can approve some stuff, but he can't approve other stuff. That's what the state is saying. You guys figure it out. What works best? And if I had county commissioners in here, I'd say, please delegate as much as you can down to the planning commission. Because there's sometimes we have too much process, right? Do we really need 17 hearings and 17 reviews? Can't the planning commission, you guys are pretty smart individuals, can't we just figure it out and apply the code and approve it? I don't know. That's what this area of the statute is saying. It can be anybody, depending on where you are, but planning commissioners, your job is to, and I would suggest annually or maybe every other year, and you can recommend to your attorneys, work with them, but figure out who you think should do what, and then you make that recommendation up to the county commission. So in other words, hey, county commission, we really looked at all our processes, and we should be approving subdivision plats. There's no reason why you guys need to see those. And they may, of course, because they're elected, say, sorry, you guys are appointed, you'll do what we tell you. But at least you've done your statutory duty by making the recommendation of what you think should happen. And then the county council obviously takes the final action on that. But something you might know that you have that ability to look at. Appeal authority. Anyone want to fess up to being an appeal authority in the room?
So I've got a quick question on the last one.
Sure.
Our planning commission is our land use authority, but we do have some administrative applications that staff reviews and approves. Would that mean staff would need to be added as a land use authority as well?
Absolutely, and we'll tell you why that's important with the next slide, because it triggers a legal process. But absolutely, you should have a section in all of your codes that says who does what. So you as planning commissioner should be able to go to your county code and say, oh, this is what I was told I was supposed to be doing. Why is that important? Not only so you know what you're doing, but what about if I come to your county, I want to know if Chuck's going to deny my permit. I want to know who I can hold accountable, right? So I need to know that as well for transparency. Do you have a question? Okay. So absolutely, you should designate that. Some communities are going to like charts, and they have the type of permit, and then who does it, and then how the appeal is processed. Because that's the other piece of this puzzle, which is that next terminology, which is appeal authority, which replaces that board of adjustment or board of happiness or whatever you used to call those folks that pretty much you shoved everything their way that you didn't know what to do with. The state said, hey, let's clean that up. We're going to call it an appeal authority, and they have two distinct tasks. So that's one, to hear variance from your code. So on the one hand, while the state says, you guys decide what you want in your code, the state flips and says, when somebody wants to vary from that, we're going to have very narrow rules and regulations of how they can vary it. It's very hard to get a variance, but this appeal authority is supposed to have that job. The second is actually an appeal, which is back to your question, is it important to have who takes that final action? Absolutely, because let's say you approve something and I don't agree with your decision, you deny my permit, I have the right to appeal that, and you have an administrative appeal process. You can defer and send them right to court. I only have one community in my cities that do that because they're too small to have a process, so they just send everything to court. Most of us have an administrative appeal process, but it's important to know who takes that final action, because then you know where to send it for the appeal. Does that make sense? So this chart of who does what is super important, so you can follow the correct process. Why is it important to follow the process? So the state can see that we're adhering to what they're asking, and hopefully give us that ability to retain the right to direct our own vision. So planning commissioners, again, you are supposed to advise and recommend to your county commission who you think how this should work. So you can have a board, they can do both of these things. You can have one person. Okay, so for Morgan County, I am the appeal authority. I live in Summit, so it's super nice because I can go to Morgan, make some tough decisions, and then I can leave. So I don't get beat up at the grocery store. So it's a hard job, this job. You as planning commissioners need to know, do I ever act as an appeal authority? Like if the staff approves a permit, do I hear that appeal, or does it all go to the county council? Or what do we do? So you need to know that so you can put it in the right direction. And then if you haven't had enough by 5 o'clock today when you're done here, we are doing an appeal authority training, another 2 hours. We're doing one tonight and one tomorrow, and we'll do some more in the fall. It's very targeted, it's very legally, I don't know, it's the most technical legal process at the state for land use. So we offer really in-depth training on that. Any questions on the role of appeal, variances, authority? Yes, sir.
So like in your situation where you're the one person on the appeal group, if they don't like the appeal, is there any way for them to go to a higher, to the council, or to?
Great question. So what happens after the appeal at the administrative level? It goes where?
District court?
It goes to court. So yeah, they have another bite at the apple. Yep. So you guys can figure out what works best. You could have a board, you have one person. It just depends on what works. The problem, and I think why they went away from having the board of adjustment, was it's hard enough to get 5 or 6 people, and then to make sure they're trained in how to do this. And then because they should be meeting infrequently, then like by the time you convene them, like maybe some have died or moved and it's sort of like, and then they don't know what they were doing. And so you want to really kind of keep this board and commission trained and up to speed. Okay, appeals and variance, we kind of went through that a little bit. Our gentleman already told us right here, after the decision is rendered, they all go up to the court. So we want to make sure whoever is doing that is doing it correctly. Probably don't want a judge reading notes saying we denied it because we hate Bob. So you really want to follow the code here and be clear and make sure the process is pretty understandable. Okay, John Jansen's going to be in a little bit to talk to you about the general plan and zoning, but I just wanted to, again, your statutory authority, a reminder, you have to have that general plan, it's legislative. You guys, the Planning Commission, are responsible for creating that document and required to have one public hearing. We suggest, of course, you have many, many more. I say the general plan is the hardest thing to do. Do you think we could get a quick consensus in this room today on plastic bags? How do you get a consensus for the vision of growth for your community? Super hard, right? But that's your job. And it's super important. And then, of course, the code informs that plan, right? The detailed specific, how you deal with that vision. And I think general plans have evolved a lot over the years. It doesn't have to be this huge 100,000-page document. I say make it a checklist. Where do you want to go? How are you going to get there? Land use, housing, transportation. Sir?
So if you have two codes in two different sections, say the engineering code and the planning code, and they conflict, does that make it a free-for-all? Does that make it tie? Or what does that do?
So here's a thing that happened a couple years ago. So if you have standards for development in your engineering code, those have to be codified in, or engineering or development standards, those have to be codified with your land use code. So that's one thing. But if there is a conflict, yes, you will be at the whim of the developer who wants to choose whichever one, I think. Maybe Sean, you can help me out here. But if there's a conflict, it's you guys are the ones that will suffer from the enforcement, not the developer, because of that tie goes to the runner statute. Does that make sense? Am I?
Yes, I'd say that if they're usually the developer will pick one over the other because it's going to cost less or be easier to do, right? I think you're in that case probably forced to do that one rather than the one that is more onerous.
Yeah. Does that help?
No, I think, yeah.
So you got job security. You got to go look at those too and make sure that they yeah. And that happened, I think it was 2-3 years ago now, where we had a lot of communities where there were these road and development standards, and the engineers were. It was just on a document that they created, and those really need to be codified. And what that means is they have to go up through the Planning Commission and approved by your county council.
And the other question I have
Yeah.
with that is these separate entities like special service districts that have like a different set of codes that apply across many jurisdictions. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, good question. I don't know, do you want to talk about how you guys deal with developing those, or no, you don't want to? Okay. That's a really good question. I guess, I don't know, and maybe Sean, I'm going to ask you again, or any other attorneys, I guess, obviously, if they're in your, you have to adhere to that in order to get that service. But if it conflicts with your basic code, I'm not quite sure how, I don't know, I guess you have to do an interlocal agreement or work something out with them. I'm not sure who supersedes though. I think, I don't, that's outside of my pay grade.
Yeah, I would say that
know.
it's so fact specific, you're just going to have to go to your attorney and say, what's the best way to get this resolved?
That's what the attorneys say. Come check with us.
That's right, 'cause we want to be employed too.
Yeah, I'm a planner. I don't know those big legal questions. Yeah.
I think just going along with that, I mean, we're dealing with that right now in Washington County. We have some shouldn't say conflicting codes, but there's a loophole. We have an older section of the code that requires RV parks to go through a zone change process. And we created, because we have glamping and all, different types of camping out there, we created a definition under conditional use for rural recreation ground. There's no densities or anything established in that conditional use. An applicant, who also happened to be on the planning commission, so it's been really fun, came in to do a project that's majority RV park. And so he's like, well, it mentions that I can use RVs in the rural recreation ground. That's a conditional use, I'm gonna approve that. Or that'll be an easier process than going through the zone change. But then the masses came out and were upset about it. And so now there's this big battle about, and this also goes into our special service districts and some of the other things that we're dealing with is we have the firefighters or the fire district in that area that wants to stop the project. And so they're trying to use their power and authority to try to stop the project from happening. And so we even had just a meeting we had state fire officials, county fire officials, and special service districts, a meeting just to talk about who covers what.
Wow. Fun stuff. Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah. I mean, I think we work through those with discussion, right? Same issues with your city. I don't know another avenue for that. Yeah, thank you for that. That's helpful.
So is there a specific process that triggers? Or is it a process that the counties and the planning commission make up?
What?
Does it slide into like an appeal process?
For what? I'm not understanding your question. I apologize.
So you have multiple jurisdictions conflicting
Correct.
with each other. Is there a process that's established that fits under it in order to resolve it? Or is it, you're kind of making up the process as you go?
The attorney takes care of it.
That's a technical term, by the way. It's a legal term we use in Washington County. So, in the example that Scott gave, I would say this. If you look at the creation of that special service district and dealing with their fire special service districts, I know what that's like because I've had to too because we border them. But they're created to do specific things. So their jurisdiction may be oversight over the fire code. However, the county still retains the ability to zone and do all of those regulations that they believe meet the code. If there is a dispute between that district and the county over fire codes, then you can always go to the state and ask them to help resolve it, or the last resort is going to court. But as counties, you still have that primacy over all of these planning issues, unless for some reason, and I don't think you can, but some aspects of it were ceded to a special service district. I think legislatively, you can't do that on most of these. It's got to stay with the county commission or council.
And with our situation where we do have a very involved fire chief, he's wanting to be involved in events. And we want his input on events because, again, health, safety, and welfare. We have a lot of events we want to be safe. But he's wanting to, some of it, we have an event that's happened that's on UDOT right away. Well, UDOT's good with it, but the fire chief isn't. And so it's like, well, UDOT, in our meeting, we're like, UDOT's the authority. We appreciate your comments and your opinion on it, but we're not going to let a fire chief overstep what UDOT, who's the traffic engineer's approval on their roads is.
So is that clear as mud?
It's been helpful.
Okay. Yeah, and again, I think it's like either, just who trumps what, but the base zoning rights you have, and then interlocal agreements. And then I think the state process also, it recalls a discussion on the other end is the developers were concerned about on subdivisions about the fire code, about different fire marshals enacting standards for what type of road pavement had to be done. And so that was a state legislative change that happened with all that discussion. So yeah, there are nuances to everything. I wanted to mention, and I think John may do that, but I just wanted to alert you of two resources under the general plan. One of the changes made under the state statute this year was this Senate Bill 34, which means probably nothing to you, but what I like to call it is the Housing and Transportation General Plan statute. And they made significant changes to the general plan. And we have a summary sheet. We have a link on the league website. On our homepage it says Housing Clearinghouse. And these are applicable to the counties. Box Elder, Cache, Davis, Iron, Salt Lake, Summit, Tooele, Uinta, Utah, Wasatch, Washington, and Weaver were the ones that are subject to these new provisions. And you guys actually, this is one where you guys got a may and we got a shall. So you can look to us and maybe your may shall turn to a shall in another year or two. It seems like that's always what happens. But these are provisions to do what we've basically been doing, I think, anyway, is looking at land use, transportation, and housing, right? How they all work together. They're all combined. But for the cities, the gun is on us to look at how we can reduce barriers to increase housing, how we link it to transportation and employment, all in the name of the incredible growth that's projected to come our way, which you already may be feeling in some of your communities. Some of our communities don't have the growth, but on the Wasatch Frontier, growth is here, it's coming. We gotta figure out how to deal with it. So these resources, the summary sheet and some other housing policy considerations and other things are on our website, should that be of help or use to you. So John's going to talk more about meetings and provisions. I have a few more minutes left right here, right? We're going to just talk a little bit about a review, and I think Johnny may show you a video later with Brent Bateman, who's from the Office of Property Rights, Ombudsman, and that is a vehicle for mediation or another step before court to get an opinion about a dispute or decision that you're having on land use in your community. But when you sit on that dais up in that agenda that you have, so you all have agendas, right? You all have a strong planning commission chair who runs the meeting really well and tight, right? So we'll also talk about rules and procedures. Johnny will later today about how you're required to have those. Let's talk about how you move through that agenda and the legal arms around each of those arenas of decision making. Legislative, administrative, quasi-judicial. Those are the three areas that you can move through on one agenda. What does that mean? So legislative. So you're creating the new ordinance for the no more stucco subdivisions in our county ordinance. And you are saying, this is what we want to do. Do you guys think it's a good idea or a bad idea? Legislative, you're about to create policy. Is this a good decision, a bad decision? So you want public input. You want that vision, that thought, those feelings, those emotions. Okay? Planning Commission, you're on the front lines in the sense that you take all that public input and that gathering and you forward that up to the county council. It's a very broad arena. It's where you have the most discretion to decide we want it, we don't want it, based on that sort of general plan and that community vision. So that would be the creation of an ordinance. So that could be on your agenda. You could have members of the public there. You could have a public hearing in that public meeting. Next item on the agenda, you could shift to the approval of a subdivision plat. Do we want to open a public hearing? Do we want to hear what everyone thinks about the plat? If they really like it, if they don't like it, if they think it's a good idea or a bad idea?
Do we want to or should we?
Both. It's an administrative item, and there's a distinction under the law between legislative and administrative, and there's important ramifications for these categories. And you are actually, at that point, looking at that subdivision plat. There's no public hearing mandated by the state So I ask you why and for what. If you do hold hearings, why and for what reason? And are you getting what you need from that hearing? And more importantly, are you asking the public the right questions in order to get the right input? But you are saying, does that plat meet our code? Check, check, check. You're administering the law that you created back in that legislative arena. Okay? And then there's a third area, which is quasi-judicial, which is like I like to call the Judge Judy section, where you're looking at variances and appeals. And this is where the state puts very strict limitations and says, on appeal process, there are strict procedures that you have to follow, as well as with variances. There are 5 criteria you have to meet. You have to meet all 5. If you don't meet all 5, you can't vary from the code. So very broad to very narrow. Brent's video, and I think you'll talk a little bit more this afternoon about how this matters when you get input and when you ultimately make that decision, how it can then be treated with the public and through the courts. So here's your first introduction to terms that you will be repeating at 3 a.m. this morning: administrative, legislative, quasi-judicial. Administrative, legislative, quasi-judicial. You'll have those seared in your brain. I highly recommend you put them on your agenda so that it's a flag to you to know, oh, I'm in this area. It's also help to the public, right? So how are you going to deal with the public when all of a sudden you just ask them how they felt about something, and now you're moving to another item, and you know what? You honestly don't care what they think because you're administering it. But do they know that? Are they going to be happy about that? So things to think about as you run your meetings, and Johnny will give you some suggestions about that this afternoon. Again, that flexibility shifts and that discretion shifts. When you're in that legislative arena, ordinances, general plans, development agreements, rezones, annexation, huge amount of flexibility. Does the developer or the applicant have a certainty? No. You don't have to give that rezone. It's not a right if it makes sense and it adheres to your plan and your vision. Okay, it shifts when you go to those administrative items. They have a right, right? If I meet your code, I get my permit. I have an expectation here. And then that final area, very narrow, very clear cut. So just remember how that power grid kind of shifts as you move through those different items. These distinctions, whether it's legislative or administrative, really need to be identified in your code. And that also gets to who does what. And that helps as well. In state law, when you administer something, basically if you meet that code, it shall be approved. Okay, so that's the way to think about it. They meet the standards, they get their permit. You need to make sure that that's clear. This is another important concept. Anyone ever hear the term, well, I'm vested, or I went to your planning commission meeting, you guys nodded and said, I'm vested, I have a right. So it's super important for the private property rights kind of bright line or delineation or what actually gives them that right to have a development interest in their property. So again, the onus is on us, and this is the language that we'll go over that the state tells you, but the onus is on us to have a definition of what a complete application is and a process to notify the applicant of it. And why is this important? So let's break this down. So there are 2 parts of the statute, and this is the trigger that gives me the right in order to proceed under your code and develop my property. So some of you may be doing code updates, changing the code, looking at different things. How does that affect my right? Like what code am I under if I'm an applicant? How do I know? This is the statute. So it says, an application for a land use approval is considered submitted and complete when the application is provided in a form that complies with your ordinances and fees. So I go to Summit County, I submit my application for a conditional use permit. I pay my fees. They have a form, they give me back a card, and it says your application has been deemed incomplete because you missed X, Y, and Z. So I get X, Y, and Z. I come back. They say your application has now been deemed complete on this date. Here is your notice of that. You are now able to go through the review of our land use code. You are not approved. You are not denied. I don't know, there may be other things they might ask of you, but you have a complete application at this date, and you are entitled to go through our code as of that date. Does that make sense? That's why it's important. Because A, it's a formal sort of contractor starting point, but B, if you change the code, they know what code they were under the rules are at that time. And B, it gets away with this nod and handshake. I was at the planning commission meeting when I went and I talked to them. They looked at my plat and they said, everyone said it looked great. I'm vested. I have an approval, right? So we gotta maybe, like those informal review things are great. We gotta make really clear we need a complete application to vest them in the code. So you all have some kind of, your staff or planning commission, if you guys do it, you all have some kind of complete application form or process, right? Yes, perfect. Okay, we're done with this section, then you guys are in good shape. Any questions on this? Yes, sir.
What if I guess their application wasn't complete, they were missing X, Y, Z, and they came back, and it took them, 3 weeks to get that application back in, and then you started the process to alter that zone, that they would be vested with that, correct?
Right, but you should either you'd have a notice of that so they knew, or you would tell them.
Yeah.
Like, hey. Because sometimes the code changes are to their benefit, right? And ultimately you want to work with them, right? Unless it's something you're trying to prohibit, then it's probably not going to be a cooperative relationship, but maybe it is, I don't know. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's what that, so that completion trigger is super important and it lies in the statute. Sir?
So if they give a complete application, they're vested in the process, but not with the density or the actual outcome of the commission, correct?
Well, it's...
Because the plans haven't been reviewed yet. So.
Right. You're just complete that you're ready to go through the process for review. So in that substantive review, those items will be decided or determined and whether it's negotiated, approved, or denied, right? It's just you're allowed to go through that code, whatever you have in your code that tells you how you determine that density. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because you have that all clear too, right? You have all your PUD, your density stuff all clear. Okay, good. You guys are in good shape. Education. So we talked about this a little bit. We talked about plain language. We talked about agendas. So I just say it's a two-way street, right? When you're here at those meetings, you're there to hear from the public. You're also there to help the public understand, right? So you're learning from them. They're learning from you. It's continual because you always have different people at the meetings, right? So Johnny will talk maybe a little bit about that, but I just want to say, think about all these things we talked about this morning, and when they come to a dais or when you're running a meeting, how that works, how that interaction and that education works. So planning commission, I would say, know what you do. What do I do? What is my role? If I'm not an appeal authority, who is? You'll learn this afternoon. You have to have statutorily rules and procedures. You have to understand the OPMA. You're bound to that. That's another acronym, right, on our list. So you've got OPMA now, Open and Public Meetings Act, and GRAMA, Government Records Management Act, and the Ethics Act, which you will all learn about how you're complying to that this afternoon. And then I say, like for county commissioners, or at least they were here, or my message to them is, let your have that communication. Let your planning commission know what their roles are. Delegate to them if you can, right? You guys, sometimes we don't need to have 17 steps to get a permit. Maybe we do. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that's your job, is to look at that and decide what works best for your community. Go through your codes. Make sure that not only do you comply with the state statutes, but that you've gotten rid of that subjective language. Okay, take a quick look, maybe make a work chart. What do we need to fix? What works, what doesn't work? Look at noticing and mailing, why and what for what reason. What are we sending out in our notices? What does it say? What are we asking? So that's it for me, unless you have other questions. I think John is up next, but he's not quite here yet. So we can take some question and answers. We went over today the acronyms, okay? So you all may be land use authorities. If not, now you know what it is. You know what an appeal authority is. You know and love CLEDMA. You know what LPMA and GRAMA is. We, like I said, even though I represent cities, our land use codes are the same. Is there anything we can do to help you? Our trainings are always open. Appeal authority, land use, whatever we can do to assist you. We are here to help doing, and I know Sean's going to talk later today about working with cities, and we're happy to help continue that dialogue and communication. So, any questions or comments? Or
are you putting that appeal meeting on your website?
So that one is not, we're not taping it just because it's so interactive and nuanced. So we're just doing those in person for right now. We haven't figured out a good way to make that social media friendly. It would be super weird and boring just because the way you have to film it, and I don't think people would want to watch it. So I don't know. If you can help us figure that out, maybe we need some college or high school kid to help us figure out how to put it on Snapchat. But it's still just in person and interactive. But we'll be doing more in the fall. But we'll definitely see if there's a way we can do that. So yeah.
How about your work from Saturday? Is it online?
So not yet. We got that and we're editing it into hour sections, because that's the other part. It's a 4-hour video tape, and nobody wants to watch that. I mean, can't believe people come on Saturdays, which is awesome. But so we're editing it, and I think maybe in 2 to 3 weeks. And I know you had an older copy. I don't know if you guys ever made any headway with segmenting that, but I would think by the end of the month. And it's on the Land Use Academy of Utah website, which I forgot to mention, which I know you all visit and have as a bookmark. But that is the state website with all the land use resources, publications on there for you. And we just updated that, and we're trying to make it more user-friendly as finding, we have definitions, we have general plan videos, everything you could use at your meetings if you want to educate the rest of your commissioners that didn't make it today. But I forgot to mention that, but Johnny will be showing a clip from it later today, and he'll show you it online. So, thanks, you guys. Appreciate what you guys do.